intro. I played some Hamilton. I set up the fact Disney is playing it all weekend. I bet that you're a Hamilton fan, but I don't know. Are you?
I, I was actually going to say, I think that was the first I'd ever heard of music from it. I've never seen it, and I've heard about it a million times, but I've never heard it myself.
That is unbelievable. You're like Jonah Goldberg yesterday. I asked Jonah Goldberg a Harry Potter question, and he had no idea because he hasn't read them. Don't tell me you haven't read Harry Potter either.
I think I took one of my little cousins to one of those movies about 15 years ago. But the dirty secret about me is my pop culture knowledge of anything after about 1990 is pretty bad.
You know, I am on the worst streak. Eliana Johnson, Jonah Goldberg, Steve Kornacki. All right, three very different people. Don't know anything about Harry Potter or Hamilton. I honestly, I must have the most culturally isolated group of guests going. But you do know polling, so welcome, Steve. I hope you have a great 4th of July. I want to ask you about a Zogby poll. Now, I am not a fan of Zogby polling. I don't know if you have an opinion on it or not. I don't normally report Zogby polls. Do you have an opinion on Zogby polling?
Not a strong one. I mean, I generally my thing is always if you got one, take all the others out there, average them together, and that's your compass.
That is generally what. That's why I watch you, and that's why you're usually right on the mark. Yesterday, this poll put out by Zogby though got my attention. They asked 1,004 people, I believe, um, how likely 1,007 likely voters. How likely is it that Vice President Biden is in the early stages of dementia? More likely 55%, less likely 45%, and the numbers got larger in the pro dementia the younger the voter. What do you make of that finding and of that question, Steve Kornacki?
Yeah, boy, that's a sensitive one. I guess a couple things. You say it's the younger they get, the more the concern is there. The thing I've noticed in polling recently, though, is that Biden's lead in the last 2 or 3 months among younger voters has actually gone up. There was a lag there with him, sort of a surprising lag. I would say late last year, start of this year, where he seemed to be pretty significantly underperforming with younger voters, relative to how Democrats have been doing, how Hillary Clinton did in 2016. It's now up to about a 30-point, 3-0 advantage for him there. So I wonder if it's one of those things where you look at younger voters, you're seeing in polling an intensely negative view of President Trump. It may be that they have a pretty negative view of Joe Biden, too, in other ways, and a pretty skeptical view maybe of his abilities, but they still prefer him to Trump.
Now, as an interesting matter of constitutional law, I've always told people who question the president's temperament that the Constitution is very strong, and it actually doesn't matter who is president, depending on who is surrounding the president. And I think that may be reflected by this poll because it is combined with fairly significant statistical leads for Joe Biden right now. The averages are strong to come to the conclusion that Americans believe the executive branch doesn't really matter that much, except in terms of Democrat versus Republican, that there are administrations, not presidents. Am I way out on a limb there, Steve Kornacki?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to what you're saying, and I think there's also a lot to just we are in a particular type of election right now where you have an incumbent seeking reelection, and I think that just changes the dynamics of the race. Unlike 2016 where it's an open seat, this is somebody who's been in office for 4 years, and to a lot of voters, I think we've seen in modern history they treat these elections as a referendum strictly on the incumbent, and in that sense the challenger can be in a good place if the country is in a negative enough mood about the incumbent. I think of George H.W. Bush back in 1992, actually the last incumbent, to lose a re-election race. And you just look at some of these questions on the mood of the country right now, particularly when it comes to the coronavirus and race relations, the two issues that have been dominating the national media conversation. Those are two issues where Trump is just doing terribly in the polling right now. And I think he has lost ground in the last 2 months as those two issues have come to the fore. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
Now, tell me how much, because the wrong direction numbers are very bad for the president. How much does the stock market impact those? Because, as you know, the stock market is doing incredibly well. It had the worst quarter ever in 20 years in the first quarter. The second quarter was the strongest quarter in 20 years for the stock market. And again, markets across the world are up today. I expect it to continue the momentum as reopening continues, even with the virus spread. How much does mood of the country improve as stock markets go up, Steve Kornacki?
See, that's the interesting thing. I don't think it is right now, and I think to me this is my understanding of where things are. If you took, in fact, there is a poll right now. I'm pulling it up right here. I'm looking at it. This is the USA Today Suffolk poll. Came out just yesterday. Trump still leads Biden on the question of the economy. Which candidate would you prefer to manage the economy? Trump still leads Biden, and that was the case back in January too. Back in January when the unemployment rate was under 4%. I think that was worth a lot more. Assessments in polling back then, people were feeling good about the direction of the country. Trump was doing much better against Biden. But what it is right now in the same poll, if you take a look, that same question, Trump versus Biden, on coronavirus, Biden leads Trump by 24 points. On race relations, Biden leads Trump by 32. I think that has just wiped out the advantage that was there and, in fact, still is there for Trump on the economy. But as long as everybody's talking coronavirus race relations, I don't think Trump's getting any benefit from that.
Now, Steve, I want to try my theory out on you. You're too young to remember 1980. But 1980 was you can't trust Reagan, you can't trust Reagan, you can't trust Reagan, you can't trust Reagan. And Carter was ahead, but he had a lingering problem, which was the Iranian hostage crisis. At the end, it broke for Reagan dramatically, and he beat an incumbent. This seems to me to be the reverse of that, which is you can't trust Trump, you can't trust Trump, you can't trust Trump. Biden is way ahead. The challenger is way ahead, not the incumbent. And I think it could flip at the end rather suddenly if those doubts about Biden increase. Your thoughts on that?
So that's interesting. Yeah, I was, full disclosure, I was one in 1980.
I know, it's before your time.
But it's one of those. I'm obsessed with modern political history. I've read up. I've talked to a million people who were around back then, seen all the old clips. And my sense of 80 is that what broke it wide open for Reagan at the end was that debate October 28th at the very end, and all those doubts about Reagan took center stage, and he just dispatched of them with that performance. It was a command performance. And so, yes, to your point, that is the one thing, and I hear this from folks around Trump. That's the one thing I think they wonder about right now. Assuming you get debates in the fall, if there are those doubts you're talking about, and just in general about Biden right now, if there are those doubts right now, he's benefited from the last few months of not really being that visible publicly. This was the first press event he did this week in months. He's in a spotlight in those debates that he hasn't been in for the last few months. How does he perform under that spotlight? Does it put any doubts that are out there to rest? That would obviously be to his incredible benefit. Or does it create, does it feed, does it amplify doubt? And that would be a pretty big variable, and it could change the race, absolutely.
Now, the second thing that I saw the president roll out yesterday in the Fox Business interview is that Joe Biden won't be running the government. He'll be the president, but he won't be running the government. The hard left surrounding him will be running the government. Leader McConnell has made the same argument. Tom Cotton has made the same argument. The president is obviously going to go with this, which is a Biden administration is a hard left administration at home and an appeasement administration abroad. Does that work when you're running for president? Can you run against the people you're bringing with you, or do you have to run against the candidate, Steve Kornacki?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. Now, again, if Biden, struggles in the spotlight, I think that could, bring those, to a different level. But I think right now, the problem Trump is having is they want to make that argument, but Biden, when he is asked about these questions, isn't giving them ammunition. What I think specifically of here is this issue of statues, of monuments, where the discussion has gone beyond, or the actions, I should say, of the protesters has gone beyond Confederate, Civil Wars. It's gone to, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses Grant, George Washington. Biden was asked about that in that press event the other day, and he drew a line, immediately between anything Confederate and anything else. And, I just look at, the 23 other Democrats running for president, and I can look at a lot of the other Democrats who might have won the nomination, and I would wonder, if they'd be going a lot farther than Biden is on a question like that right now. But Biden, I think, has an instinct on a topic like that and a lot of these other sort of, cultural hot buttons to rein himself in and to not go where the kind of Twitter, mass in his party is. And I think as long as he does that, it really does complicate, an effort to run the campaign you're talking about.
Last question, Steve Kornacki, with the dementia question on the table. And I don't even frame it as dementia. I just frame it as age question on the table. His vice presidential selection becomes much more important. Does that not? I think, I'll put it in the phrase what I think. I think he should move away from Kamala Harris towards Val Demings, because Val Demings is a much more centrist African-American woman than Kamala Harris. and that will reassure voters, even if Joe Biden's age is an issue, that there isn't a hard left Democratic Party behind Biden. What do you think?
You know what I've been wondering here on the Kamala Harris versus Val Demings versus anybody else for that matter is if you remember that first Democratic debate last summer when Kamala Harris had that prepared line where she went after Biden, saying, hey, you were fighting busing in the 1970s. I was being bussed. I was that little girl. It was in the moment a devastating and humiliating moment for Joe Biden. Obviously not enough to cost him the Democratic nomination, not enough to vault Kamala Harris to it. I wonder if that sits in his mind. I wonder if that sits in the mind of the folks close to him, and that ultimately, whether that's something, I don't think it's something he would ever say, but whether that's ultimately something that pushes him in another direction. I've seen that in the past. I mean, Bill Clinton in 1992 was considering Bob Kerry, senator at the time from Nebraska, to be his running mate. Kerry had run against him in the primaries. Kerry had said some nasty things about Bill Clinton and his service, or lack of service record, I should say. And I think that ultimately pushed Clinton away from Kerry and toward Gore. I wonder if you'll see a similar thing.
Okay, bonus question quickly. Val Demings, police background. We have a policing problem in the defund the police attaching to Biden. She is a police officer herself. Her husband is a police officer. Does that increase her attractiveness, in your opinion, Steve Kornacki, to the national political electorate?
Yeah, see, that's for exactly the reason you were just saying. If the Trump idea is to run against Biden and saying he's going to empower radicals, if his VP choice is a former policewoman, boy, I think that makes it, again, it complicates it a little bit.
And a Floridian. I watch that space. Steve Kornacki, always great to talk to you, Steve. Go watch Hamilton over the weekend. Oh, my culturally deprived guest list is really something.